Brown, and I am picking up where Ian left off this morning. This session is about active travel, which means walking and cycling, basically. And what we wanted to do is Neil Webster, and Neil in the middle here, and we kind of ambushed Maggie when we knew that this event was going on, and we said, you really need to talk about active travel because we think it's very important, because obviously we would say that because we're quite passionate about it. And she said, great, well, let's make the case. So that's what we're going to try and do, kind of explain how active travel fits in what we've been discussing this morning and how you manage your workplaces. And we have three experts who are going to help us do that. So we have Megan Sharkey at the end there, who's from Westminster University, who is described as you're a city change maker, and you've been doing that globally for a few years now.
Yep.
Megan's going to explain a little bit of that because we're going to give everybody 5 minutes to explain their view on active travel. Neil is a property consultant, avid cyclist, good friend of mine. Helped me raise some money for Alzheimer's a few years ago. We did a charity ride together, which we're very grateful for. And Neil is probably best known in these circles, probably because of the report that he did. He did 2 reports for the British Council of Officers about the impact of cycling on the modern workplace, which he'll probably reference later. Ben runs a business called PedalMe. Ben will explain it later. If you go down to the car park, you'll see exactly what it is, because there's a massive bike down there that you can probably ride home on, I would have thought. If you ask Ben nicely, you can book you a ticket later after drinks.
Download the app.
Yeah, download the app. I did it this morning. Some people have seen that on Twitter. I absolutely loved it. It was brilliant. Much better than a taxi, much better than the bus or the tube. But it's a logistics company. It's not just about moving people, it's about movement of goods, and that's part of the whole active travel piece. It's about using less vehicles. So, we're going to start with Neil.
Okay. So as Andrew described, sort of real estate's my day-to-day business, and cycling was my passion. Therefore, when the two meet, I get very interested. So the report Andrew refers to, you can find online, so I won't talk too much about that. I'm going to ask you some questions first. So, hands up if you reasonably regularly cycle into your workplace, or walk, or run, or e-scoot. No, keep your hands up. Keep your hands up. I'm keeping the total active travel. I mean, Ben's hands up all the time. So. Okay, now, keep your hand up if you did it today. Okay, on such a good day as well, isn't it? Okay. Does anybody feel that in stating active travel that I didn't include some form of active travel when I asked you to put your hand up? Any other forms of active travel that you could think about? No? Sure? Okay, that's fine. There is a good report coming out which Megan's involved with, which will probably help describe some of that in the future. So, first point I'd like to get across is that it is about sort of multimodal share. So I'm claiming to have cycled in here, but I cycled from Blackfriars. I took a train to Blackfriars, and my bike's all folded up over there. So, and there are other forms, yeah? So I'm classifying, walking from the tube, that's active travel, isn't it, as well? So I think people think their dominant form of travel is their form of travel. And that there are people who are supposedly arrive at the office by train, but no, they've arrived on their feet, haven't they, really, at the office? And there are some who run from the train as well. Sorry, why was that funny? I think I know one reason, but because they don't like going on the train, they run away from it.
Train phobia.
Yeah, true. And I think that's relevant in terms of some of the stats that some of the cities hold about modes of travel, that they seem to count what people use most, rather than the fact that there's different ways of doing that. So that's one. The second point really is around don't forget the runners and the walkers and the less able. And a sort of friend, colleague of Megan and ours runs Wheels to Wellbeing. Wheels to Wellbeing is a charity dedicated to disabled cycling and walking the line. And I think there's an awful lot of misconception about cycling is for able-bodied, and that's what we should be catering for in our workplaces. But I think there's a greater spread. There was a piece I was involved in probably about 3 years ago. It's probably it will be the biggest cycle parking in a building in the city soon. And when they said, what should we do with this? I said, and what are you doing for the runners? Yes. So there is a thing that people get just into one mindset and it's one form of travel. So get that. And the other bit I'd say is that if you think that not far from here, down on the embankment, which I was saying to this young fellow earlier, is actually a sewer with a road on top. It's not a cabbie's road. It was designed as a sewage system, and they put a road on top of it. Because I was walking on the Greenway the other day. So my point about that one is that businesses were actively involved in campaigning to ensure that that happened when Boris was getting a bit dicky about whether or not he would say yes or no to it. And there's a bit, again, Cycling Works, you can look up online, got involved in getting major businesses to support active travel infrastructure. So if we're thinking about end-of-trip facilities, we have to think about the infrastructure that gets us to those those end-of-trip facilities as well. And that quite often can be the weak link in the chain. People can have their kit at home, they can have some brilliant facilities at the point. So the two nodal points are just not connected. So I'm not saying go out on the streets with your placards, but there are ways in which this can be done. So that's my 5 minutes or less.
Thank you very much. Ben, your turn, your 5 minutes.
Sure. So I'm Ben Knowles. I formerly was a transport planner, and I did things like I redesigned roads to make it easier for people to get around by bike. I ran projects in schools, I ran projects in council estates, helping people from deprived communities access cycling. I believe passionately that there are so many benefits for individuals and for the businesses that employ those individuals in getting people to walk and cycle because of the time savings. Now, people think of walking and cycling as generally being slower than motor vehicles, but in the vast majority of cases, an experienced cyclist will be quicker than a motor vehicle. When I commuted from Reading to Farnborough every day, it's 18 miles, and I realised that I'm unusual, right? Not many people will cycle 18 miles to get to work and then 18 miles back. But for me, that was quicker than when I tried to drive it. When I was trying to go to at peak times, there's no way that I could compete. But it's not just that I couldn't compete, but the variability in travel times for driving was so great that I was having to leave home 45 minutes earlier when I drove than if I went by bike. And I was like, well, there's all these problems. I mean, I need to carry bikers. So I was running projects down in Farnborough, helping kids get on bikes. I need to carry breakfast for 100 kids. And obviously, I can't do that by bike. But then I found I could just get a trailer and I towed that behind me. And that was still quicker than a car as well. I'd be riding a bike with a trailer behind me, like a trailer designed for carrying some kids, but I just piled it high with brioche and fruit juice and the like. So there's so many levels of benefits as well, because it's not just the raw time saving, but I spend very little of my life in gyms, right? Physical activity is essential for our health. I don't spend any time doing that because I'm doubling using that time, right? So imagine that trip from Reading to Farnborough. It was taking me like 55 minutes, wherever it was taking me. So I was getting 2 hours of exercise every day, and I didn't spend any time in the gym, and it was taking me less time than it was taking me to drive. A more sensible human being would probably have cycled to the train station and then cycled at the far end, or walked to the train station and then walked to the far end. About 3 years ago, I came up with this mad idea where I was going to outcompete Uber using bikes. And this is another example of using cycling, the fact that cycling is quicker, to deliver a competitive advantage. So the company was founded in February 2017, first trades last couple of days of April 2017. We started with 2 people working part-time. Today it's 56 members of staff across 2.5 years. We don't advertise. It's very rare for me to be able to have the time to come to something like this because demand outstrips our ability to meet that demand by so much. Something like last year, month-on-month growth was 10% each month. Right, and that is because bikes are quicker than motor vehicles. And in a city, I mean, we're just killing it. We're so much quicker. I know around the centre, maybe, so with an experienced rider, we have very large ESS cargo bikes which can carry 2 adults on the front or 150 kilos of cargo. We also have trailers that go behind the bike, so if we need to move more things, then we can do that too. So we do things like collect from Isleworth 230 boxes of flowers, deliver them to Islington, offload from the trailer onto other bikes, distribute from there, do that far cheaper than anyone could hope to do it with vans, and deliver a much better quality of service as well, because guess what? Riding a bike is fun and people like doing it. So we have people smiley, happy people in silly pink hats, dropping off the flowers to people's doors and doing it with care because they care about what they do because they enjoy their job. So there are huge business advantages for employers, for individuals. There's also huge advantages for businesses in making use of cycle logistics. So I'm just going to stick that bit in there to sell myself a little bit. But there are a vast array of jobs that can be done by bike and can deliver huge advantages in terms of costs, in terms of time savings, and in terms of quality of service.
Including office moves.
Including office moves, yeah, we've done that too.
We'll get back into that.
Yeah.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much. Bit of a sales pitch, but I think we'll forgive you for that. I was just trying to set it earlier on Twitter, so why not? Megan, you can put some of this in perspective, I think.
Yeah, so for the last almost 14 years now, I have been working in sustainability, everything from behavior change to infrastructure. Really, how do we make sustainable infrastructure and connect that to the actual day-to-day practices people need? Because it's great to say to do it, and the infrastructure is there, you provide the infrastructure and vice versa. So the 3 things I was thinking from a practical perspective around design. Firstly, how many people work primarily on single ownership buildings? No one. How many people primarily work on like multi-ownership or multi-occupant buildings and their design, right? So when those things come about, there's sort of 2 ways to look at them. One is from this common space perspective, so thinking about end-of-trip facilities. So when you're designing, what sort of end-of-trip facilities do you need to actually enable active travel to happen? And this is everything from secure facilities, underground parking with showers, lockers. A lot of organizations that work in buildings like this, like if they have a management company, for example, CBRE, can provide that collective space, and different leases will tap into that. The benefit, I think, of these sort of end-of-trip facilities is they become a big selling point for the building, not just for the people who cycle there or walk there, but actually for any sort of health and behavior change programs that are being run in those facilities. The other part of the ETFs, and this touches on the cycle logistics, is when we're talking about shifting from predominantly motor vehicles to active travel and cycle logistics, or even first mile and last mile deliveries, our current buildings really aren't set up for that sort of infrastructure. So we actually need to change the way we're designing for sort of white vans to actually make it easier for companies like PedalMe app to actually have the space to deliver efficiently and effectively. And how do we use these consolidation centers to actually reduce traffic around our sites and make that sort of procurement actually possible? Because at the moment, if the design for the building isn't there, then it doesn't matter what sort of fleet management or procurement policy you have if that can't be executed. And so that can work either with the whole building manager, which if they're redesigning common spaces or renegotiating leases or negotiating park spaces, these are where those opportunities arise to retrofit spaces. But actually the knock-on effects that has is quite positive in terms of actually driving changes, and as well as improving the BREEAM standard, for example, because you can get more credits that way by having the active travel facilities in the building and the design standard that meets that. And when this is happening with the ETF, that sort of knock on, well, what sort of visitor parking do you have? Is that accessible? How does that connect to the building. So oftentimes there's this huge disconnect in design between the train station, for example, and actually getting your employees to your facility. So when you walk out, where do they go? Does the pavement just stop? And buildings have a lot of play with how they treat their public space at the ground floor level to actually making that a welcoming experience, or placing the stairs in a common area. So for example, when I walked in here, you can't find the stairs, but for the first 3 floors, you should easily be able to find the stairs. And so those are sort of all these little bit of design experiences that create the possibility to enable those active travel choices. And then I think the last part of that is understanding what your workers want. So organizations can do workplace travel plans that can actually be quite positive for designers to use as tools to understand what those employees want. And then by knowing that then knocks on to offering different employment packages, for example, or joining the Cycle to Work scheme for employers. And so these are all the sort of things that can sort of flow out from discussing that design project and design experience, and actually ensuring that it's meeting sort of multiple tick boxes. And then the last thing I will add is, when looking to the future, we have micromobility. So there's active travel, but you also have a lot of people with e-bikes and people with accessibility needs that are using modes of transport. And when we're designing these things, where are we going to put mini charge points or mini stations, and how will these be built into the buildings as we go smaller and smaller and smaller with our transport needs? Thanks. I think that's it for me.
Yeah, that's cool. Thank you very much, mate. So what we want to do, you could probably guess, the 4 of us could talk for ages about this because we love it. But that's not the point of this session. The point of this session is for you to ask us questions. So if you want to pick up on some of the design points that Megan's making, go for it, because that would fit in very well with some of the stuff we talked about this morning about how do we make a change. We learned this morning about why we need to make a change, but we didn't really talk about some of the practicalities, so there's some stuff there that we could pick up on. I could have a private conversation in front of you all about the report that Neil did and some of the personal experiences we've had, and he's got some very funny stories about being turned away from buildings. We've seen him with his foal at the basket and said, "Can't bring that in here, son." Why?
They didn't say son.
They would to me, obviously. And Ben can talk about logistics, and Ben and I can have a private conversation about that, because I've got some big ideas about what FM should do in terms of moving logistics and using e-cargo bikes. But we want to hear from you. So please ask us questions. I will write things down. I've tried to summarise some key points in an informal manner. Thank you.
So it's none of those things. But I've kind of shied away in the past from promoting cycling too much in my workplace because of the sort of personal nature of it. I've witnessed some bike accidents, and I guess it makes me a little bit reticent to sort of push people in that direction. Do you have any advice on kind of making it less scary, making it more accessible, kind of demystifying, equipping people with the skills that they need to take up these active forms of transport sort of more safely, I guess, and confidently?
Neil, do you want to start with that?
Yeah, so I'd quote, and you'll work out who it is. So he used to be in Argent, he's now at British Land. And his answer to that would be, I don't encourage my staff to cycle. I provide them with the facilities, and they choose to. Yeah? And I think that's build it and they will come aspect to it. I think there's always that questionnaire that says health and safety is one of the issues that does stop me. So I'd go back to my point about, well, let's call it campaigning. In order to get safer facilities, we need to have them built. In order to have them built, we need to promote and campaign for them. Yeah? And the counter to that is some work in Waltham Forest, which has proved that the investment they put into that borough through better low traffic neighbourhoods and infrastructure has increased the life expectancy of the residents. So I think we've got to sort of balance these things out. Yes, there's always an inherent risk in walking out the front door in the morning, isn't there? Whether you choose to cycle, walk, train, car, whatever. I fully accept the point. If we're having this conversation in the States, we'd probably be looking at it a bit differently, wouldn't we? There'd be lawyers queued up out there ready to represent people.
Yeah.
So it's a balance.
Yeah, so I think from a practical perspective, there's two things I would do. One is most organizations, particularly in larger cities, like this don't tend to do workplace travel plans. So they don't actually know how or where their employees are coming from. They just assume, well, there's public transport, it's someone else's. They give you sort of the London cap and they're like, okay, your problem. But that can give you a good place to understand how far people are, what they expect, where they're coming from. So are any behavior change programs actually possible? Because sometimes the distances just mean that that's the wrong course of action if you're looking at behavior change. So once you know that, a second possibility is not to work on the direct, let's say they live far and doing a bike buddy type program isn't possible. I would get involved in something like the London Ride as an organization, as a health challenge, or as a way to engage in employee bonding and health and an activity that they can bring their families on that doesn't force them to ride on car-based infrastructure. Because in the London Rides, on that day, for example, it's in the summer, you have a number of groups that will safely cycle you to the ride, and then you get the 10 miles, and that can be something that will really give people some confidence to take the next step. So I would think of some of these things in order to start them on that journey, and then see who is interested from that. So it's non-threatening, you're not forcing them to ride, but you're gathering information and promoting really activity within the workplace, which I think is a good thing.
Yeah, so my background is I trained as a chemist and I made drugs for GlaxoSmithKline for a few years before I decided that was a horrendous place to work. So
no offence to anybody from GlaxoSmithKline.
So I'm always quite interested in getting into the numbers. So I spent, when I was promoting cycling to kids, well, a lot of parents would say to me, well, you're encouraging my kid to go and cycle on the road and they're going to die and it's going to be your fault. I spent a lot of time looking at the stats, and so in the UK, roughly 100,000 people die every year from inactivity, and about 100 people die every year riding a bike. So the risks from cycling are a tiny, tiny fraction of the risks of not cycling. And people can say to me, oh yeah, well I could go and do some physical activity outside of cycling, and a small proportion of the population will do that, but most of the population won't, because humans. Right? So I started, before I started promoting cycling, I worked promoting physical activity for a London-based charity, trying to get kids from deprived areas into rowing, which is all very laudable. It was great, it was really fun. But the truth is that a tiny minority of people are ever going to take up and continue doing leisure time activity. I did drop into my gym at the start of January, and I went park running at the start of January, and attendance was about 3 times what it is now. Humans are very, very poor at adherence to physical activity programs unless they're using it for something practical, unless they are cycling to work, they're walking to work. And those figures that I was talking about at the beginning, with the 100,000 people dying every year from inactivity, are why people who cycle regularly have 40% lower mortality rates than those people that don't. So that doesn't mean you're 40% less likely to die because everyone dies, right? But you have a 40% lower chance of dying in any given year, whatever age you are. 40%.
I'm not sure if you're making the fear go away there.
I'm balancing it.
The stats are good. If you're so I cycle, but I don't cycle in London. I was brought up in London, and I left 20 years ago. And the first time I was on a bike in London was this morning when I was ridden here. I was effectively driven here on a bicycle. Now I'm not trying. He's not paying me, but if you want to get confidence about moving around, it was a revelation. It really was. It was amazing. Really quite fascinating. But we could probably put you in touch with people who could do the things that Megan was talking about. If anybody else wants to find out, there are organisations.
Yeah. I think the workplace travel plan for me is a really big one, because if you don't understand where people are coming from and what their current needs are and some of that, you can't make the decisions. Is it best to do something like a one-on-one? Is it best to offer them free rides for multimodal journeys. You have no idea what the behavior change on the other side needs to be because you don't know the front bit.
Questions?
I was just going to support what you were saying there. I was born and raised in London. I've been cycling in London every day for the last 47 years. I've been knocked off twice, both by pedestrians. 47 years, so.
Thank you very much. So, any more questions? We're going to pick up on that.
I think there's just one thing. I'm a runner. That's
Yeah.
my sin. I run marathons for fun.
Yeah.
Everyone understands that. A lot of my family kind of give me a stick. They sell your hips, your knees, and that are all going to die.
Yeah.
You're going to kill your body. Recently, last month, my brother dislocated his knee unloading his van.
Yeah.
He doesn't run, so where's the lesson?
Yeah.
I'm still kind of going around. But I think one of the things that I have fun with in terms of workplace, so we get a lot of guys that do it in the summer. We've got the cycle to work scheme. You go to the winter, and as soon as it starts getting a little bit cold and rainy, it just kind of disappears, and then all the single mode, one person sat in a car and driving how many miles, just kind of comes straight back up. So I've not found any mechanisms for kind of getting that people out in the wind and rain. You're waterproof.
Yeah.
I kind of, it doesn't matter what it is, I'll go and run it. Laser trainers up and off you go, but kind of getting that psychology and kind of getting it through the winter months is the big challenge.
I think this is where the end of trip facilities really matters. So for example, at the university I'm currently at, and on a main campus where there are 5,000 to 6,000 people there every day, we have 2 showers for 5,000 to 6,000 people and about 50 bike parking spaces. And we have some more out in the front. It's always overflowing and always full. And a few lockers the students can get. And some of them travel quite far. So even if they want to do it in the winter months, you need those facilities so that any sort of elements, you have time to, fix yourself however you want to be presentable for the day. Or if you want to even go for a run at lunch in the wind and rain and stuff. If you come back and you only have 1 shower for hundreds of employees and no facilities, why would you do it? I'm hesitant to do it, and I cycle rain, wind, or shine, and I still sometimes get quite annoyed. So I think it's a very important thing that unless you have those facilities, you can't do it. And there's easy ways to retrofit them, I think, into the building.
I want to bring Neil in, because that was exactly what you did your research into.
Well, we're going to talk about the research. We're going to do it a different way. So I can use words to communicate to you, and you can sort of think through what I'm describing. But in July, we organised a tour of office facilities, sort of the cycling facilities in office buildings, and we showcase what's around. It's totally independent. We're not promoting anything. So if anybody's interested, let me know via Maggie, and that will just bring it to life, because we can talk about them, or we can show some pictures which we haven't got, but we are talking about end-of-trip facilities, and you can picture something which is 2 showers and 50 bikes for God knows how many people, the host of the Active Travel Academy. But there are some fantastic things out there as well, and you may have seen some, you may have not.
Yeah. And it's interesting. I've seen some that have actually. Oh, sorry.
Because we've got questions.
Yeah, sorry. Go.
Oh, that's okay. Because I think my question's been answered. It was about actually getting those facilities. Because my company, our tenants and the landlord are quite good at things, but we only have 2 showers per floor, per office floor, and that actually completely, basically, people can't cycle or run or do any sort of activity because there's no shower.
I think there's some emerging lease agreements that are entering the market because the way that we structure parking within those lease agreements is changing. And this is offering some opportunities to renegotiate ETFs where the parking space has been that leaseholders pay into for their employees. And that's something that I'm finding building managers to be really supportive of, because it's decoupling it from the tenants, which can change over time. So their investment into better ETF facilities will be recouped, as well as it makes the overall building. So when I'm negotiating with them, it's not necessarily that your floor needs to have it. It has to be yours alone. Particularly if you have multiple tenants in a building, which pretty much everyone in London does, the better way is to get a top-notch facility for your whole building, similar to like the Bloomberg building, which has some amazing ETF facilities, like unbelievable. Some of these look like spas, like you don't want to leave there. But having those as part of the whole building, it doesn't matter what divisions or how they break up the floor, because it's actually part of a shared facility, which means you can get more facilities. So if you might have 15 employees, another one might has 2, and that makes it easier for floor space over time. So that's definitely what I would be pushing and renegotiating with them. And for them too, car park spaces are really expensive. Like, they are really expensive to build in buildings. So the ETFs have a better value for money in terms of turnover, because you can fit 10 bikes into one car park space, right? So you get a lot more value, I think, in that. So that's what I would be looking at, definitely through leaseholder arrangements and how they divide parking.
Another question?
To everyone,
Yeah, go for it.
no one in particular. When driving this change, so trying to encourage people or providing facilities for people to be more active and take on more active travel, where do we think this change is being led from? Is it management boards? Is it the FMs? Is it logistics? Is it designers? Kind of where do we think that is
I
driving?
think it depends on where you sit in the organization and what management tools you have. So this has kind of been one of my specialties, how to drive this sort of stuff. So for example, if I sat in the infrastructure division, I would be driving it through my maintenance and procurement, because they're the ones who were dealing with the facilities. So I'd be driving it through facilities management. If it was HR, I'd really be focusing on employment packages and how we can change employment packages or cycle to work scheme to support, to even make it an option, because you'd be surprised. I think if you go back and ask your employers, are we part of the cycle to work scheme, you will find a lot of them are not. And it's really great value for money for people wanting to make a switch to bikes. If I was in the logistics side, I'd be looking, at my fleet management. So for example, some organizations, they couldn't even hire PedalMe app because they're not in their fleet management. So a simple act as getting them into the supplier system can then enable people to then pick up, those sort of changes. Another one with HR is obviously health, so like the London ride. And so I guess it depends on where I sit. And if I sat on any sort of executive committee, I would be putting that into whatever committee paper I can to filter it around. So there's some key pinch points where you can shift stuff.
So whilst I agree with the theory of Megan, there's a project I'm not going to name where the board had given sanction to the stopping the increase in cars, but the behaviour isn't following it, and the board have sanctioned it. Okay, so the counter slightly would be I'd try and find the person with the behaviour as well as the position they're in. So the example I'll give you is that RBS headquarters in Scotland was fitted out with good cycling because the chief exec cycles. It's simple, yeah. So top down, find the highest point where somebody's a champion of it, and then make them officially the champion as well. So I think it's blend the two.
Or the longest employee.
Together.
Who's been the longest employee? Has someone been there 15 years and knows everyone, can do everything? Can you change them? Because if you change them, that's a nice knock-on effect as well.
So one more point here was that there are emerging some facilities which are servicing a number of buildings. Yeah. So I'll give you an example. H2 is part of the Verde building in Victoria. Yeah. So it's a Tishman building, as this was apparently. And in there they've got cycling facilities, and there's membership available to run a everybody to use that as their parking facility and then go and walk to their building somewhere else.
Yeah.
So I'll give a bit of a plug for somebody else. And there's a little thing called Run Friendly at the moment, which is providing showers on a membership basis. So if your place doesn't have facilities, you can run to this location, shower there, I think lockers and stuff, and then just walk to your place. So it doesn't necessarily have to be in your building. That could be the temporary solution whilst you're campaigning for the change in your own building as well.
Yeah.
Some of those things like Run Friendly are a little bit exclusive, aren't they? Could be one of the things about active travel is that you want it to be inclusive. You don't want to exclude anybody in terms of their ability or price of any.
But if the building manager, if you can't get it, you could pay for your employees to have that membership. That could be a benefit for them.
Any more questions? So
A lot of what you've talked about has seemed to sort of hone in on cities.
you're talking to Megan, aren't you?
Yeah, all of you, really.
Okay, right.
It's honed in on cities. I mean, what always interests me is that some of these big off-campus sites, you know, like the Vodafone building, Dyson, they are in the middle of nowhere.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they really are. Even if you're a keen cyclist, you're talking about a lot of cycling together. What can be done to get people? Oh, well, apparently Andy's got the answer.
His turn.
Stop me if I get any of this wrong. One of the biggest issues is how we plan. So Megan will know more detail about that. But so I'll give you an example. It's not business, but housing. Persimmon, allegedly, trying to build. They've got some land on the edge of Cardiff in South Wales, very close to the M4. Curiously, they think the only way they can make that connected to the rest of Cardiff is by building another motorway junction. That's just rubbish. It's just building houses and stuff in the wrong place. And that's basically where we go wrong. We do that all the time. So that's the main thing. The planning system needs to change to make that not happen anymore.
But it's also like corporate real estate are doing it because it's cheaper to
Yeah.
do in the middle
I
of
actually
nowhere,
think-
so then you assume that everyone's going to drive in.
You know, you can overcome that problem. So going back to this workplace travel plan, at facilities like that, you know, majority of people are under 30 miles to that site. And a lot of them would be within 15 miles. So while 18 miles per bin is nothing without an electric assist makes 15 to 20 miles really easily doable.
Right.
And I think at sites like that, where they do workplace travel plans, and you look at some of these large facilities, they do start, they think about busing. And that's where you could go to a consolidation point where everyone bikes less than 5 miles and is able to get on that site, you know, because we're talking about moving a few thousand people, so these things become commercially viable. And then that land space they have for those 3,000 vehicles, or however many, I'm just, you know, guesstimating, actually becomes usable land space because they have that better travel plan, and it means that now people have options to cycle. So I mean, e-bikes, 20 miles on an e-bike is nothing. That's like less than an hour. You know, and most of them would be spending that in the car anyway.
And you want to come in here?
Yeah, I've just got a quick question for Ben, really. I love the app. I've only discovered about it today. It's going to be something I use and promote. To make it more of the way that companies think about logistics deliveries, what switches would you change? What things would you change to enable your growth to be where you'd like it to be?
So in terms of facilities, there are some facilities that ban bikes coming into their loading bay because they have health and safety concerns. So Canary Wharf have they have a policy of in a lot of the buildings. I think a lot of them turn a blind eye to the policy now they've seen us coming in, because if you're delivering 300 kilos of stuff, it's not really practical to park outside and then carry it all in.
No.
It's not really doable. But that kind of thing is like just an obvious, really big problem. When we go to make deliveries to Harrods, they have the same rule. So we have to walk in and queue a courier desk for 20 minutes, which ends up making it way more expensive to the client than it needs to be. So small changes like that. Broader changes, well, if we get stuck in traffic, the number one thing that slows us down is motor vehicles. So when it was the beast from the east and London came to a standstill, we were running the shortest journey times we've ever had before or since. Because although we were riding slower because we were riding on ice, we were not being delayed as much by motor vehicles, so we were still actually covering more ground and getting more jobs done per rider than we would normally be able to do, which was lucky because most of the motor vehicles couldn't get into London because they were stuck sliding backwards down hills because they couldn't. Motor vehicles aren't very resilient and they're not very good at driving on ice. Whereas it turns out a very large cargo bike ridden by a highly trained, highly skilled rider can actually just carry on riding as normal pretty much on ice.
The bit I'd add to it is that you're in the city now that buildings over a certain size have to have a dedicated consolidation centre.
Yeah.
So with consolidation centres, maybe the last mile or the last whatever distance is not going to be by a van. Yeah, it's going to be sort of dedicated, efficient I think we've got a blended economy, but imagine the impact that's going to have on the city as more and more of those take part, and it's not one package in a massive van going into the city.
Yeah.
So we started late, but I'm going to have to wrap this up because so two more questions, and then we'll move on to. Thank you.
So sort of related to the question that you asked before, but I was just thinking, because I was here a couple of weeks ago, we were talking about the future of workplace, and ITV were talking about proposals they were thinking about satellite offices, and whether actually kind of having a more kind of distributed workforce, either kind of outside of kind of big cities like London, or kind of basically near where you live. Whether that would be, obviously that would encourage people to cycle and kind of use different forms of transport that could be greener. But is there kind of like a bigger picture thing of how we need to be thinking about the future of workplace and how that can influence these things?
Okay. Neil, what do you think?
Yes. Well, there is a longer answer, but it's logical, isn't it?
Yeah.
Put the place of work closer to the place of home, and the distances are not the 18, 20, 30 miles that we're talking about. Easier said than done.
Yeah.
Interesting. You said ITV.
Yeah, they
Okay.
were talking about it.
Well, I think it reflects also the nature of work, doesn't it? Then a lot more peripatetic. When my daughter works in the broadcasting industry, she's never at home. Mainly overseas, but so there's all sorts going on.
Yeah.
Between teleworking and commuting, like with all the teleconferencing facilities that we have at Active Travel, there's no reason why we need to be moving as much in motor vehicles to get around to satisfy our day-to-day work needs. Those two things should be able to satisfy a majority of our work travel needs. And so I think it's not necessarily about, when I talk at a lot of these events, it kind of always seems an all or nothing thing. And I think where active travel can definitely play a much bigger role, especially when we consider cyclogistics than we currently do. But what we really need is, you're going to need multiple different modes. I recently saw a really interesting one. The business had different travel hierarchies. So they had this personal travel hierarchy, how like teleconferencing first, then active travel, then public transport, and then like renting a private car was like at the bottom. And like they used that for employees, and they had this little flow chart, what do you need? And they had the same thing for some of their procurement, this like sustainable green plan. And so if you just had to whip out the flow chart, okay, I'm doing this is what my company says I can do, and I can have all of these other receipts, procurement, I can actually enact that administration portion of it. And I think that was really cool to me because it made it super easy for behavior change. It showed them like that you can actually hire PedalMe app, and then makes the rest of that sort of actually possible.
Cool. That's great. We could talk for ages. I'm sure you've got that message. If you've got further questions, then either put them through Maggie, or you can find any of the four of us on social media. Thank you very much indeed, guys. And Active Travel, go for it.